Century, ambition and nationalism led soldiers to subvert civilian government. In January 1885, General Charles Gordon was fighting for his life in Khartoum. The battle became so famous that MGM made it into a Hollywood blockbuster. Gordon was immortalised in the person of Charlton Heston. The general had gone to Khartoum to command Egyptian troops trying to staunch an Islamic revolution. His opponent claimed to be the Mahdi, or messenger of Muhammad. The Mahdists were sweeping the country, and Gordon believed threatening British interests in Egypt. The general was in trouble, but had only himself to blame.
General Charles Gordon, nicknamed Chinese Gordon because of the amount of time that he spent fighting in China, was a brilliant soldier, but also a slightly unhinged human being.
Gordon was an evangelist. He was an enormously popular public personality who'd won the hearts of the British people at a time when evangelical Christianity was very fashionable.
Gordon had previously governed the Sudan, so when news of the rebellion first reached London, he argued for intervention.
When he hears of the uprising and the difficulties the Egyptians are in, clearly he feels his experience out there might come in useful, and he begins to lobby the government for his employment.
The Prime Minister at the time was William Gladstone, the Liberal. Gladstone had no interest in the Sudan and was determined not to waste lives and treasure fighting there.
Gladstone had this rather romantic view that those who lived in far-flung parts of the world were entitled to lead their own lives and get on with it in peace. But Gordon, of course, is sufficiently politically adroit to be able to engineer a press campaign on his own behalf.
It was when the Pall Mall Gazette hit London's clubs on the 9th of January 1884 that the government really began to feel the pressure. The paper had a scoop, an interview with General Gordon, and it advocated that he should be sent forthwith to the Sudan to sort out the situation. The army was harnessing public opinion to drive foreign policy.
You have a cabal of British Army officers who are all for imperial expansion and all for planting the Union Jack in various parts of the globe. And I think to actually influence government policy in this way by using the press is completely unprecedented as far as the military were concerned, and completely out of order too.
Gordon won the day, and under popular pressure, Gladstone agreed to send him to Khartoum, but only to evacuate the Egyptian army and its handful of British advisors. Gordon had other ideas. He wanted to smash the Mahdi and retake Sudan.
Gordon, personally, without reference to anybody else, decided he would sit in Khartoum and simply blackmail the British government to do things his way.
Barricaded into Khartoum with his Egyptian soldiers, Gordon began lobbying for British troops to rescue the situation.
Gordon knew from the beginning that he had no hope of persuading the British government through normal channels to send an expedition to save the Sudan, and for that matter to save him. His only chance was to appeal over the heads of the government to the British people.
Happily for Gordon, the British consul in Khartoum at the time was also a journalist. Gordon used his new ally to convince British readers that they must intervene.
He did this by brilliantly exploiting the presence of Frank Power, the Times correspondent, to build up this tremendous emotional picture of this great English Christian sitting in Khartoum, abandoned by his own government, doomed to die unless his country did the proper thing and sent an army to rescue him.
Gladstone had seriously underestimated the way a growing electorate could be stirred up by messages in the press. Faced with a public clamour for intervention, the Prime Minister gave up. He authorised a British Army mission to advance and get Gordon out.
The sum total of this use of the press was to actually embroil the British in a war the government never wanted to be involved in.
although of course he wasn't as important a figure as Sir Richard Danett in the hierarchy of the army. This was a pretty outrageous thing to have done.
It was probably the most monstrous abuse of the constitutional position of a professional soldier in British history.
The relief expedition advanced too slowly to save Khartoum. It was still 2 days away when the city's defences were overwhelmed by the Mahdi's warriors. Legend has it that Gordon faced his attackers and accepted death heroically. Britain was outraged.
When that rescue failed, that Gordon became a martyr, and Gladstone endured enormous unpopularity, not least from the Queen, for having allowed Gordon to die.
Sudan marked